The Biden administration now has 1 week left in power, so it's almost completed its 4 years. And of course, like anyone in modern America today that has any access to major media, they want to try and convince you that what they just did was really, really good and very, very strong. And so President Biden today gave his final foreign policy speech, which really wasn't a speech as much as it is to trying to convince you that, yeah, everything I did was great. And anything that didn't happen, well, I didn't want it to happen anyway. We're going to try and actually put a little bit of analysis behind what he said. And of course, there's nobody better to do that than Larry Johnson, former CIA analyst and author at sonar21.com, and obviously a very bright shirt fellow. So,
yeah.
One of our fans here. First of all, Larry, just welcome back to the show. Always a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.
And so, listen, I'm gonna just jump right into this first little because this speech was literally just wrapped up a few minutes ago, and Gary was able to grab some of these sound bites here, and I thought that this little stitched together piece here was really indicative of kind of how President Biden views himself.
Right now, in my view, thanks to our administration, the United States is winning the worldwide competition. Compared to 4 years ago, America is stronger. Our alliances are stronger. Our adversaries and competitors are weaker. We have not gone to war to make these things happen. My administration is leaving the next administration with a very strong hand to play. And we're leaving them in America with more friends and stronger alliances, whose adversaries are weaker and under pressure. And America that once again is leading, uniting countries, setting the agenda, bringing others together behind our plans and visions.
Now, it's probably no surprise there that there wasn't a single piece of evidence provided for any of that at all. He just made these bumper stickers. I mean, it was more like a compilation of bumper stickers. But what do you make of that?
Well, he could have said, hey, we've run out of ATACMS missiles. Stop making them, and we've used them all up in Ukraine, and we don't have any more to send. We can't manufacture enough 155 millimeter shells to keep the Ukrainians supplied. So we've had to beg, borrow, and steal from South Korea and other places. So really, across the board, we're not succeeding on any one front. Oh, yeah, we launched Operation Prosperity Guardian to open up the Red Sea, and the Houthis, a bunch of people that are firmly embedded in the 15th century, have managed to defeat our aircraft carrier. So yeah, America's doing great. Not to mention the significant portion of Los Angeles disappeared over the last week, up in smoke. Homeless crisis. I mean, this kind of delusional world where he tells himself lies. And as I said to you off air, but I think it's appropriate. What do you expect from people who believe that men can have babies and men can breastfeed? So when they get off into this kind of nonsense that defies science, we shouldn't be surprised when they start just making things up in the realm of foreign policy.
Well, and those so that was those sound clips were just a little bit ago, just like less than an hour ago, I think. But there was another one that he made on Friday. Specifically, he did actually talk about something specific in that one about the Russia-Ukraine war. And he made this very interesting comment about the chances that Ukraine has in the war.
Well, I had a long talk with Zelensky today. And I think that as long as we continue to keep Western Europe united as it relates to Ukraine, that there is a real chance that the Ukrainians can prevail.
What? If as long as we keep Europe together, Ukraine can prevail? I mean, if you could help me out, Larry, because apparently I haven't looked at a battle map in the last 30, 40 minutes. And I guess there's been some major revision and turnaround on there that's going to make the Russians apparently are getting ready to flee the country.
Well, first of all, he's admitted the predicate no longer applies. Europe is united, and Europe's anything but. You had this French guy, Thierry Breton, and he basically said, he threatened that if the Germans decide to choose the wrong party, like AfD, that they'll intervene, the EU will intervene to overturn that election. And he said, just like we did in Romania. You had the Romanian people out protesting yesterday EU interference in Romanian domestic political affairs. You've got Austria, Hungary, Slovakia moving in the opposite direction. Croatia now has elected someone who's opposed to the war. So instead of a united Europe, you've got a Europe growing increasingly divided. So right on that premise alone, there is no unity in Europe with respect to supporting Ukraine.
And by the way, you mentioned Slovakia, and I'm afraid I didn't think of it until just now. We actually had a clip of Robert Fico just excoriating Zelensky in public and just saying, hey, it's time to get this deal off the table because it's costing my country, whatever. And I'm like, wow, even for Fico, who's been, certainly pro, let's get the war over with for a long time, but for him to be that strong against Zelensky openly, I thought was really noteworthy.
Right. And then just in the last 24 hours, Ukraine tried to launch a strike on the Turkstream pipeline that flows out of Russia into Turkey with natural gas that winds up going into Europe, primarily into Hungary. And so you got the Hungarian leader, Orban, just excoriating Ukraine. So Ukraine, instead of building up friends in Europe, is the list of the number of people they've pissed off is growing with each passing day. So, and then the concept of Ukraine prevailing, even some of the more diehard supporters in the United States have conceded, including Robert Kagan, that Ukraine is not getting Crimea back. They're not getting the Donetsk back. They're unlikely to recover any of that territory. And Russia is continuing to advance more each day to the west in Ukraine. So, again, this is why we're glad that Biden is on his way out. He is out of touch with reality.
And sometimes, Larry, we can say, okay, well, Biden probably has early onset dementia. Actually, not so early. I think there's many signs there that there's some serious, legitimate issues with dementia. So you can say, okay, well, he just had some detachment here. But then you broaden the lens out a little bit, and you can see it wasn't just him. I mean, I could put the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, who at the a few days ago at the Ramstein meeting, it continues to say stuff as though it were the first month of the war, not at the end of the third year of the war, et cetera. And then here is Jake Sullivan, who is, and again, these are this one and something else I think we'll be able to show here in a minute, are talking about basically they're trying to say, hey, we did a great job. And here's how National Security Advisor views the world.
As we come to the waning days of the Biden administration, where across the globe could you point and say the United States is safer because of what we did here?
Well, I'd start by saying our alliances are stronger than we found them 4 years ago. They're stronger than they've been in decades. NATO is more powerful, purposeful, and bigger. Our alliances in the Asia-Pacific are at all-time highs. And our adversaries and competitors are weaker across the board. Russia's weaker, Iran's weaker, China is weaker. And all the while, we kept America out of war. So I think the American people are safer, and the country is better off than we were 4 years ago. And we're handing all that off to the next team, as well as having the engines of American power humming, our economy, our technology, our defense industrial base, our supply chains. So the United States is in a stronger, more secure position, and our competitors and adversaries are weaker and under pressure. I think we've kept the nation out of war. Every element of American power is stronger today. And if you look around the world at every other significant country, they're looking at the United States in 2025 and saying, damn, I wish we were in their position. Because the U.S., alone among the major economies in the world, is dynamic, powerful, propelled with very good friends and with adversaries and competitors under pressure.
Okay, gracious. There's a lot to unpack there. Let's just start with his comment there that our military is stronger than it's ever been before. And as you just mentioned, about specifically about interceptor missiles and some of these other things. But there's also literally thousands of military vehicles that came out of our military inventory, out of our storage areas that's for our strategic requirements that are gone, millions of rounds of artillery, tens of thousands of interceptor missiles. As you said, we may not have any real numbers of ATACMs even left. And this next iteration that we're going to is way below the scale on what we would need to sustain any kind of a issue. Patriot systems are gone. And then now we also had to pause a lot of the things. Oh, we had to pause a lot of the deliveries we had been making to Ukraine. This was revealed last week also, that some of the reason why we couldn't get all the stuff out the door earlier is because we couldn't backfill our own stuff right here. And now you want to tell me that we're stronger off with that? Let's start with that part first.
Yeah, it defies logic. Let's look also at manpower issues. The Army failed over the last 2 years to meet recruiting goals, but they finally, I guess, in this last year, they met them. And they met them because they lowered the recruiting goals. They cut them in half. And they go, yay, we made our goal. So it's like, it's like saying, hey, here's the requirement. You got to run the mile in 8 minutes. And then you say, oh, we changed the requirement. It's now 12 minutes and everybody completed it. Well, that doesn't tell you that you've actually achieved that goal. So whether you're talking manpower, whether you're talking actual military production, and go across, almost every single weapon category, HIMARS, ATACMS, Patriots, tanks, Bradley fighting vehicles, artillery barrels, 155 millimeter shells, an F-35 jet that's a Turkey, average and cost now $200 million a pop. And to sit there and proclaim, oh yeah, we are so strong that we could not stop the Houthis. I mean, that is, I'll put it right up there. If we were so strong, why can't we defeat the Houthis?
And Larry, I want you also to do, before we move on to some of the other things you said there, I want to stick on this topic for a second on the military capacity, because there's another weakness which I think can't be measured as such, but I wonder if you could tell me what you think of the ramifications are. It doesn't get much discussion at all in the mainstream media or really anywhere that I've seen, in that because we gave all of these various weapon systems we had from the F-16s all the way down, is that now then the Russians have had a chance to figure out how these things work in combat, find workarounds, ways to mitigate them, et cetera, meaning that if, God forbid, some weird thing happened and we had to go fight the Russians today with all of our stuff, or fight the Chinese or the North Koreans, whoever, that the information is out there of how to mitigate or minimize or even block a lot of these weapons. Does that make, or how much, rather, better question, how much does that make our defense more compromised, even if we're at full strength on any of the weapon systems?
Well, it's not just the knowledge that the Russians have acquired by seeing that these systems operate in a combat environment. It's that the Russians have been able to make adaptations on the move. In other words, they are not locked into a rigid doctrine. It is very flexible, and it entails a lot of feedback from troops on the front lines. And the problem with our military is we have not, well, we've been using Ukraine as a proxy, and we've had a few U.S. military personnel, I'll call them sheep dipped into the Ukrainian army, where they've been able to experience it. The vast majority of U.S. forces haven't. So they would not be ready nor prepared to enter into a combat environment like this. I mean, just one simple example is that once the drones started to be used, then electronic countermeasures came out to counter those drones, a whole variety of systems on both sides. The Russians were the first and have expanded it in terms of using fiber optic cable on a drone. And that means it's not being flown by any kind of Wi-Fi signal or any kind of electronic signal. It's actually got a direct fiber optic connection that allows it to penetrate. That's one of those examples of a rapid development on the ground. United States isn't even in that ball game. We haven't even agreed upon what a drone strategy doctrine is for either the U.S. Army or the U.S. Marine Corps.
And again, Larry, let me tell you why that is so egregious to me. I did a show earlier today where I used a certain screenshot of a lessons learned by an official U.S. Army lessons learned publication from August of 2021, looking at the Azerbaijan-Armenia war over Nagorno-Karabakh in 2020. And in the findings of that, they pointed out all these things that drone warfare is now going to be coming online here. They decimated the Armenian armor. They were not prepared for it, so their countermeasures virtually didn't exist. And now then you have drones firing missiles. It has drones doing all these other kind of things. And this is August 2021, where we recognize these things, all of which have exploded in this since the Russian war came in, just on steroids in every direction. But I would wager, and based on what I have seen, that we have still not put those things into effect and recognize just how vulnerable our forces are to these kinds of capabilities now. And we're not ready either for the offensive or the defensive categories. And that rigidity of the mind that you're talking about there, I think, is a bigger threat than people realize.
Well, the reason I was laughing when you said lessons learned, so during the course of 23 years working with JSOC and with SOCOM, I was involved with over 253 exercises, either scripting, plan, or executing. And always at the end of these exercises, there is the hot wash. And people sit around and they go, oh, here are our lessons learned. And man, they would record them. And I remember very clearly my first, 94, 95, when I was just getting into this going, oh man, we're going to be learning so much. We can make these corrections. And by year 20, I realized we don't learn a damn thing.
We learn a lot. We just don't ever apply them. They go back into the folder, and then the next group comes in and learns the same lessons all over again. I observed the same thing during my Army career that you did. Very well put.
And in fact, I imagine you also, at the end of each of these exercises, you'd hear, this was the best exercise ever. This was the most comprehensive. This was fantastic. I never heard anybody go, guys, we really sucked out there. This was awful. We couldn't find our ass with both hands if you stapled our hands to our ass. No, you never heard that. It was always, we're great, we're good. And that's the problem here. There's no incentive to learn, no incentive to change until you get on the battlefield and you start getting killed. You start absorbing casualties. Then all of a sudden the folks in leadership position go, oh, wait a second. If they're good leaders, they'll recognize we got to change something here. But so far we've had political leaders, not good leaders.
Yeah. Let me ask you something on that issue of the especially the wire guided drones, the fiber optic cables you minute ago. To me, that is going to be the next biggest thing, because the Ukraine side, of course, is like always happens. They've formed their own versions of them as well. And in this last mini, they called it a counter offensive. It was more like a very small counter attack in the Kursk area. Is that the Ukraine side apparently popped out some brand new electronic warfare capacities for the FPV drones, which has been so prevalent for such a long time now. And at least according to the Russian reports on that first day of the operation here, that it knocked out all of the Russian FPV drones. So then they went, of course, to the wire-guided ones, which can't be knocked out with electronic warfare means. But the issue to me is that that tells you that if you're relying on standard drones, whether it's FPV or reconnaissance drones or, the kind of drones that can fire missiles, et cetera, you're going to be in a world of hurt if that's what you're relying on. And if anyone else should say, okay, now that we're going to mass produce these wire guided drones because there's nothing you can do to stop them. And if you get volume and quantity, that's going to really make a big difference on the battlefield. How do you think that's going to apply to U.S. Army doctrine and capabilities if we had to fight tonight?
Well, if we had to fight tonight, we wouldn't be in the same ballgame. We're still locked into, I'll call it the 20th century technology. So, I remember a lot of times I'd be sitting inside a skiff and we could turn on, and you could get onto one of the.
By the way, I'm sorry for those who don't know, what is a skiff?
So it's a secure classified information facility. It's
Okay.
it's a place where you handle classified information. And on the computers, we'd watch. We called it Kill TV, and what it would be access to the drone feed that JSOC had, and you would see these drones flying over compounds, and then we'd get word that there were going to be a strike, and everybody would tune in to watch the strike. That kind of drone usage, we never saw during the war in Iraq or Afghanistan, where drones were being used like they are in this conflict in Ukraine, where the drones literally are coming in and attacking vehicles, attacking tanks, attacking emplacements, attacking bunkers. So that's one of the things where, I don't think the U.S. Army or the Marine Corps have caught up yet. And they're just starting to capture that, to recognize, okay, we need to start doing this, but we're behind. And then it gets into the issue of letting out the contracts, which defense contractors are going to get access to create these particular kinds of systems. And unfortunately, the way the U.S. government acquisition program is set up, it's not designed to reward creativity and flexibility, whereas we've seen in the case of Russia moves quick. I mean, Russia was able to transition from non-fiber optic drones to fiber optic drones in a period of a month or two. I mean, it's remarkable how fast they moved, and I guarantee you the United States couldn't do that.
And let me ask you on a related question. Let's look at tactical employment. So prior to the Ukrainian summer offensive in 2023, you had, and I showed this not long ago, where David Petraeus in May of 2023, before the thing was launched, came out and said, well, I think that you're going to see this huge success by the Ukrainian armed forces because they have now learned combined arms operations, and they're going to have the armor and the infantry and the infantry carriers, the artillery, all those things are going to be working together, and they're going to be working seamlessly to break through and blah, 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 all this stuff, right? And so they initially came on this onslaught with these large formations, and they were all just obliterated in the minefields and the artillery, et cetera. From that time, then they completely changed, and for the remainder of the offensive, they went to small unit tactics, which spread people out. The Russians have since done the same kind of thing, to where they don't lead with these big formations anymore, because if you have these drones coming in there, that if you get big troops and massed up, then you're going to die in large numbers. So everything's divided out. Now, that's what we've physically seen on the battlefield. My big concern, and I wonder if you've heard anything, because I haven't specifically, I fear that the U.S. tactical employment and doctrine is still 2003 Iraq or 1991 Desert Storm or whatever, with this company moving here and this battalion moving over there, and then all this big arrow stuff, but still in large combat formations. And I think that we could actually be hammered if we fought the current level of the Russian army today, for example.
Yeah, because all of one of the underlying assumptions of all of that is we have air superiority or air supremacy. So that, and going back to the failed Ukrainian offensive in May and June 2023, they didn't have any air cover. They didn't have any fixed wing or rotary wing aircraft going forward to attack Russian positions. So Russians, by contrast, did. And that, again, that kind of air cover makes maneuver possible. But we've entered an era. I remember Scott Ritter and I had a difference of opinion back in the summer of 2022 about HIMARS. Was that a game changer or not? And I said, no, it's not a game changer. But I think we'd both agree now that how the drones have been used, that is a game changer. And there are more changes to come. Can you imagine, Danny, one thing we haven't seen yet? Drone attacks on commercial aircraft. And I'm not talking about one drone or two. I'm talking, you've seen these drone swarms that put up and they create images. And, wonder if somebody creates that kind of drone swarm to attack a presidential aircraft taking
Yeah,
off.
I don't know, Gary. While he's talking there, I don't know if you can find it real quick, but there was on New Year's Eve, I think China had. I don't know if you saw it. This dragon moving in the air.
Yeah.
Those are drones, and if you can find it, for those who hadn't seen it, it is because I was thinking as I was watching that, this is just a nice, pleasant little thing here, but all you got to do is reprogram them to go after a different target, and I'm not sure how that's going to work out.
Yeah, so that's going to happen. One of the, just tell you right now, it's going to happen one of these days. It's going to be one of those drone attacks on the plane of a world leader, and then all of a sudden people are going to run around and go looking for solutions. But when you see what can be done, this is beautiful. It's artistic. It's it's more environmentally friendly.
And look at that headline there. That says 8,100 drones in a synchronized operation there.
Yeah.
8,000.
Yeah. So if you can do that, then you can also program it to be an offensive weapon. And so this is one thing actually that China is demonstrating there what is, appears to be a civilian capability, but it's actually a military capability. And I don't think, we've really grasped the significance of that. And we got accustomed to using drones initially for ISR, conducting surveillance, doing reconnaissance of a target, being able to tell you how many bad guys there are on a target, what are the egress points, what kind of defensive emplacements are in place, what potentially weapons are there. Then we could use bigger drones with a Hellfire missile. But I never saw anybody, and this goes back now, say 8 years ago, anybody saying, hey, maybe we use these smaller drones to launch. You could actually fly into a room and set off a device. Like with a flashbang, you could also use it on even hostage rescue attempts, where if you attach a flashbang to a drone, you can fly it into a room a lot easier than you can risk, a human being trying to get into that room.
Yeah, so many things that have been, like you said, rapidly developed on the battlefield. And then when the enemy finds a way to counter that, then to counter the counter, et cetera, all that goes back and forth. We're still on like the third counter of like 20 that have happened in this war. And so our thinking is not quite as good. So anyway, I don't want to belabor the point on that, other than to say there are some very real, significant weaknesses have accrued to the United States and our national security since we launched into this in support of the Ukraine war here. And then you have here our Secretary of State, the National Security Advisor and the President saying that we're in a much stronger position. And then I guess it was a week or so ago, the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, gave his version of how great we are.
In Kursk, what we've been doing every single day is to try to make sure that Ukraine has in hand what it needs to effectively defend itself against the ongoing Russian aggression. Their position in Kursk is an important one, because certainly it's something that would factor in to any negotiation that may come about in the coming year.
Gary, I'm sorry, that's not the one I was actually talking about. It's the one where he's in his so-called exit interview, where he's sitting there with that lady who's talking with him, whatever, and he goes in to talk more about man, we are much stronger than we were in the past, et cetera. If you can find that one, we used it last week, Gary, if you can look at that. But in the meantime, we'll just go with what he said right there, which is, he's still saying, yep, Ukraine's in a position to do good. I mean, what do you think when you hear all these top leaders saying these kind of things?
Yeah. I had the experience once when George H.W. Bush was president. So, makes me officially an old guy. And the issue was about whether or not the Central Americans were going to cooperate with the Sandinistas and coming up with a peace agreement. And, so I wrote about what was planned, that they were going to do this in spite of U.S. objections. And then when it did happen, the President Bush came out and said, "Oh, we were blindsided. We didn't know." So, I had that moment. I thought, did you not read what I wrote? It was in the PDB. Or was this just an example of, yeah, he read it, he knew it, but from a public relations standpoint, he didn't want to have to admit that we knew and couldn't do anything about it. It is better to portray it as, oh, we got blindsided. So I don't know, when I watch Blinken and Sullivan and Austin, I mean, they're lying. What they are presenting is false information. It's not accurate.
And that, actually, before you go further, we have that clip here, and you talk about some false information. Tear this apart.
Right now, as I'm looking at this, I think the real measure of success is whether going forward Ukraine will continue to stand strong as an independent country, increasingly integrated with Western institutions, and able to stand on its own feet militarily, economically, democratically. And in each of those areas, we put Ukraine on a trajectory to do that.
Do you think it's time to end the war, though?
These are decisions for Ukrainians to make.
We put Ukraine on a position to stand on their own feet economically, militarily, and diplomatically. What say you?
Okay, so let's go down the list. Ukraine has shut down, Zelensky in particular, shut down opposition political parties, refused to hold the election that was required to be held earlier this year. So they're in violation of the Constitution, has banned opposition media, has locked up opposition journalists, has banned the Eastern Orthodox Church and taken over that church, basically banning certain religious groups. It is entirely dependent upon U.S. and European financial aid as well as military aid. The number of desertions in the Ukrainian military is growing with each passing day, not shrinking. The number of troops available to fight the Russians is diminishing. So, and again, you come back and say, are they really this stupid? Are they really this venal that they're lying like this? Or do they actually really believe their own lies? Have they been told things and had no ability to provide any kind of critical thinking? I don't know which it is. All I know is what he's saying does not jive with the facts on the ground. And the facts on the ground is a reality that they're not going to be able to escape. Blinken will escape it, Sullivan will escape it, Biden will escape it because they're out of office. But that turd in the punch bowl is going to land in the lap of Donald Trump.
And in the lap of his vice presidential designate, J.D. Vance, who was on the news this weekend, who had a different view of what they're being left.
President Biden has left us an absolute dumpster fire. Now, we're excited to get to work, but we need to be open and honest about the fact that President Biden has not left the next administration in a good place. We have a wide open southern border. Oil is going through the roof. Bond yields went from 4.1% to 4.8% in a month. It's on top of the fact that President Biden has been running the largest peacetime deficits in the history of this country.
Now, I won't talk about the financial issues here, but I mean, on this bigger issue that there's a dumpster fire. Yeah. To what extent do you think in any kind of presidential transition that the outgoing side says, yay, we did everything great, and the incoming side says, oh, yeah, it was terrible? How much of this is just that, and how much of it's legit?
No, I think it's entirely legit. But to your point, I know that during the transition from Ronald Reagan to George H.W. Bush, now you're thinking, oh, they're both Republicans. H.W. was the vice president of Ronald Reagan. Smooth transition, right? Oh my goodness, it was bloody. Yeah, I think they would have been better off passing it to the Democrats from Reagan. So there is an element of that, but what you've seen now from the combination of the failure of the U.S. military aid in Ukraine to stem the tide of what Russia's doing militarily, the failure of the U.S. Navy to complete its Operation Prosperity Guardian in the Red Sea, that you can't point to any one area where the United States has, quote, been successful. And then on top of that, the collaborating with Al-Qaeda terrorists in Syria to install somebody who was once affiliated with Al-Qaeda and then ISIS as the new president of Syria, and having our ambassadors, you're going in and palling around with him. So, and whenever you're looking for some sort of consistency and leadership from the United States, you're not going to see it.
Well, that's an understatement, or the productivity, that anything that benefits our country. It's certainly a long time we've seen that. Sticking with the incoming administration, obviously one of the key things that Trump was elected to do and has been in the news nearly every day since that time, talking about what he is going to do to end the Ukraine war. And, there's all this issue about what he's going to try to do to win it and to win the negotiations and try to negotiate from a position of strength, et cetera. But there was an interesting comment also overnight, actually from yesterday on the Fox or on one of the news shows. Incoming National Security Advisor Waltz had an interesting comment about how they're going to try to get the Ukraine side to enable the Trump administration to negotiate a good position by changing the recruiting age for the Ukraine side.
Mm-hmm. I will say, the other thing that we're going to need to see is really stabilizing things on the battlefield. And one of the things that we'll be asking of the Ukrainians is they have real manpower issues. Their draft age right now is 26 years old, not 18. I don't think a lot of people realize that. They could generate hundreds of thousands of new soldiers. So when we hear about morale problems, when we hear about issues on the front line, look, if the Ukrainians have asked the entire world to be all in for democracy, we need them to be all in for democracy. And they certainly have fought bravely. They certainly have taken a very noble and tough stand. But we need to see those manpower shortages addressed. This isn't just about munitions, ammunition, or writing more checks. It's about seeing the front lines stabilize so that we can enter into some type of deal.
There's a lot to unpack on that, but the one thing I want to start off with is just from the practical perspective. We'll take the moral part separately, but on the practical perspective, I don't know if you recall the details, but when Ukraine lowered its recruiting age from, I think it was 28 to 26 or something like that, a year and a half or so ago, it took a long time for that to work its way through logistics. Through their legislative process, because it was a very emotional issue. And then they finally got it done. And then for the time that they got the law changed until you can actually get those troops into the field was many, many, many months after that too. So if anybody thinks that like tomorrow afternoon, Zelensky can just sign an executive decree and change the age to 18, and then the next day the people are going to be pouring into the recruiting station, and then a month after that, then they'll be on the battlefield in 150,000 size or something even more than that, that would somehow make a change on the battlefield. I mean, man, Larry, gosh, it wouldn't happen at all. And then if you start getting these young kids in there that don't want to fight and already see what happened to everybody who went before them, it's not going to stabilize the front.
Yeah, well, Waltz is not a stupid person, and by virtue of his, service in the U.S. Army, so he is an experienced officer. He knows better. So I have to view what he said is more of a broader, let's call it negotiating ploy by Donald Trump to position Ukraine for failure, to force them to a decision to end the war. Because Waltz knows that even if somehow you magically get this through the Ukrainian legislator, and the legislature says, okay, yeah, you draft 18-year-olds. All right, you draft them. If your goal is to have a functioning, combat capable force, minimum of 12 months of training, minimum. Better if you got 18 months, but you could get away with 12 months. So even if they did it today and it was magically, they started getting this, and as you said, by the end of January, 1st of February, you're still not going to see anything to 2026. Well, newsflash. Ukraine does not have till 2026. It's dying right now. It is bleeding out. It's bleeding men, both in terms of physical casualties, as well as desertions that are sapping the manpower strength of the army. And Russia, by contrast, continues to recruit and train and cycle its forces through, and in a way that Ukraine just cannot keep pace with.
And Larry, they could make a policy decision to say, all right, you know what, we're going to recruit those guys, and yeah, it'd be great to have 12 months, but they're not even going to get 12 weeks. We're going to give them 2 months, which is still double what most of the guys have gotten for the past 18 months, by the way. But let's just say that they went with that. Then that means that in 2 months from the time they all arrive, which would be months probably before you could get that many. So there's 4 months right now. And then in 4 months, you could have 100,000 guys who know how to fire their rifle, and that's about it. They're not going to be an effective combat force. So even then, it still wouldn't work. And I actually hadn't thought of it like that. Maybe you're right. Maybe that this is just to isolate, to highlight for the Ukrainian eyes that this is a losing proposition. Ergo, we need to make it negotiated quick.
Well, by forcing this issue, with the Trump administration forcing the issue with Zelensky, he knows that it's unpopular, very unpopular politically. So they're forcing Zelensky to basically commit political suicide. And if he refuses,
fascinating. I hadn't thought of that.
If he refuses, then Trump is going to say, hey, these guys aren't following our advice. They're refusing to take their responsibility. They want us to put our people and our resources at risk. We're done. I mean,
oh, wow.
I think
that makes sense.
Yeah, I think there may be that aspect to it. Because like I said, Waltz was what, a lieutenant colonel or colonel in the Army Reserve anyway, in National Guard. I mean, he knows better. He knows you just can't grab some snot-nosed 18-year-old off the streets and put a rifle in their hands, and then you're going to all of a sudden have a functioning soldier. I mean, 18-year-olds do stupid shit. We were 18 once. We remember.
I try not to, but yeah, I have to.
And
I do.
That's part of that process of going into basic training and the extended training.
I retired as a lieutenant colonel, but I started as a private, private first class.
Mustang.
And man, I made my share of errors, even when I was a second lieutenant too. So let's not go into that. But yes, to your point is right. They do stupid stuff.
Yeah, but one of the amazing things about military training, and whether you're talking Army or Marine Corps, and whether you're talking U.S. Army or Russian Army, is you can take civilians who don't have any kind of the mindset and discipline that's required to carry out combat operations, and you can teach them. And you can actually form units that will act not as individuals, but as a unit. I mean, it is pretty remarkable that, you can start with people not even sure what for right from left. And then all of a sudden,
I saw that.
Yeah. And it is, the military they've learned that, the good militaries have learned that over the years. And what we're seeing in the Ukraine sphere is, despite U.S. claims that the Russian army is poorly led, poorly trained, we are seeing some remarkable agility and freedom at the junior officer level, where you've got lieutenants, captains, and majors making critical decisions. And because they have that flexibility to make those decisions, they're accomplishing some fairly rapid advances now as the tactical situation changes dynamically.
Well, so, and as we kind of wrap this up there, given this comment here, and at least the significant plausibility that this is a negotiating tactic of the Trump team coming in there, this truly, even if it wasn't intended, it will have that impact to put Zelensky in a no-win situation. Either you do something that's intensely unpopular domestically, politically, or you don't do it, and then you have to face the ire of now the publicly declared from the National Security Advisor coming in here. To me, this sounds like that Trump may be thinking sooner rather than later to get a negotiated end to this.
Yeah. And Zelensky's not doing himself any favors, as you noted earlier, that his attempt to this drone attack on the Turk Stream pipeline, which has just enraged Hungary. And they view, I mean, it's described as Ukraine has militarily attacked the EU. That's the language
Oh, wow.
he used.
I didn't actually see that either.
Yeah, so they've used that language. So show me one area where things are actually going well for Zelensky, that the Trump administration is not lining up to say, "Hey, man, you're going to have unlimited support. We're with you to the bitter end." No. They're hearing Trump say, "Yeah, we got to bring an end to this. We're going to bring an end to this." So the prospects of him being able to fall back on European support, when the messages that are coming out of Germany, out of Hungary, out of Austria, out of Slovakia, not good. So instead of a unified NATO and a Europe all marching in lockstep, man, they are scattering like chickens in front of a raccoon coming in to steal eggs.
Well, ironically, even if Zelensky himself is put in this no-win situation here, who could win from this is the Ukrainian people. Anything that's going to get this war over with, and the obvious negotiated deal that's going to, the longer it's gone on, the worse it's gotten for the Ukraine side, because neither the United States nor Ukraine leaders would be willing to do what made logical, rational, moral sense. But if in this late hour, if Trump comes in and by whatever means stops this, then this killing stops among the Ukraine, and especially this young generation, which they're desperately going to need if they want to have a future. They don't need to lose one more man to combat loss.
Well, and you've had stories, the previous foreign minister, Kuleba, he sent his 19-year-old son is either to Paris or London to go to school. He didn't want him drafted. He's making sure. So and that message starts getting out that the political elite, the political connected, those who are rich, their kids don't have to go risk life and limb. It's the ones who are the poorest or the least influential.
Yeah,
they're the ones being asked to die, and that starts producing a groundswell, and that's why you keep seeing these movements. It's starting to arise in Ukraine. We're seeing it in Romania. We've seen it in Hungary. We saw it in Slovakia. We've seen it now in Austria. People are rising up and saying, "Hey, we're not going along with supporting this war anymore. We're against that."
Well, and I don't have the data handy here, but I'll get it next time. But I did see a report this morning that said that the latest poll had come out from the Ukraine side that said now up to 73% said they're willing to see this war come to a negotiated end, even if it means giving up some territory, which is a huge number, bigger than it's ever been at any point. And that, I think, tells you exactly, to your point, what the people of Ukraine are thinking.
Well, the losses Ukraine has suffered have been staggering, on par with World War II. And, again, this gets back to what we were talking about earlier with the delusional comments by people like Sullivan, Blinken, and Biden. Biden you can excuse for being demented, but here's Sullivan and Blinken engaging in talk that present that, oh yeah, this conflict's going to drag on because Russia's suffering just as many casualties, if not more, than Ukraine. I could take you back 8 months ago where there was several pundits on doing podcasts who were talking about a stalemate, that what you got going on here is a stalemate. And in fact, you've had even, I think, Kellogg may have used that language. This is not a stalemate. Never has been. It has been moving always in Russia's favor since the fall.
Late of 2022, yeah.
Yeah, late fall of 2022. And it hasn't turned back from that. So if you can't be honest about that in your assessments, then, or if you actually believe false things, then you're going to make bad decisions based upon wrong data. I mean, it's like being convinced that the worst football team in the NFL is going to win the Super Bowl. No. But if somebody tells you that, I'm not even sure who the worst team is right now, but let's just say, yeah, bet your life savings they're going to go all the way, and you're going to lose your life savings. And in this case, the ones losing their lives are actual Ukrainian soldiers.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Larry. I think that you and I have speculated that there's a risk for Zelensky that a lot of these family members inside Ukraine could one day rise up against, or other troops that don't want to be sent to certain death for no reason in the battlefield could turn on Zelensky here. But even if he's able to have Trump come in and actually get this to a negotiated settlement off the table pretty quick, I think that he would, if he survives, he'll nearly have to move to another country, because I believe both him and the Blinkens, the Austins, the Sullivans, et cetera, and plenty of others in Europe, Boris Johnson being one of the few, when the war is finally over and the guns go silent, and people start getting back on with their lives, and then researchers start coming in and finding out what was actually happening at given points here, and it becomes clearly evident that a lot of these people, like Lindsey Graham, continued to keep encouraging these people to go and die in large numbers, and there was no path to that ever to end good for them. Yeah. History is not going to be very kind to these people, and somebody like Zelensky, I mean, even if he wasn't assassinated outright, I mean, you could certainly see that future governments saying, "Hey, we're going to prosecute you for malfeasance and leading our country into certain death, instead of making any number of political compromises that could have preserved our country long time ago." I mean, we see that it happens all over the place in countries where they bring those guys back up. And I think that it's not going to, he ain't going to be remembered like Winston Churchill II. I promise you that.
Well, and this gives Mike Waltz or John Radcliffe, if Radcliffe is confirmed as director of CIA, great leverage when they sit down and have a chat with Zelensky. They'll be holding a U.S. passport in the right hand. And they'll be saying, Volodymyr, here's the deal. You either agree to this deal now, and you got a guaranteed passport, you're coming to the United States, you'll be protected. You can live in Vero Beach or down in Miami Beach. You pick your beach, but you'll be protected. But if you persist, if you want to pursue this war and you're going to ignore us, no passport, you're on your own.
That'll get some leverage.
Yeah. No, they've got that. They definitely have that leverage. Zelensky's is a lot of things, but I don't think he's totally suicidal. Because part of why he's continued to do what he's doing is he's under threat from these neo-Nazis, because they're the ones that basically helped put him in power. And so he's not willing to cross them yet. But there'll come a period where, I wouldn't put it past Trump on the whole negotiation side. Trump will realize he's going to have to negotiate with those crazed neo-Nazis too. And that, back away, bring an end to this, stop, and you're not going to be prosecuted. We've made deals with the devil before, but Zelensky's got no leverage anymore.
Yeah.
That's the clear message that has to be understood.
Yeah, I think it does, and I have a feeling that message is starting to get through, and I think that this broadside by Waltz over the weekend may be exactly that, intended for that very purpose. So we'll wait and see how that works out, and continue to track this as it develops. And we're now 1 week away from the inauguration of President Trump, and then we'll see what happens on the other side of that. And we'll definitely have you back to help us, make sense of whatever Trump ends up saying.
I'm going to an inauguration party next Monday.
Well, I guess we won't have you on Monday then, but
we'll
look forward to hearing what you discover in your party.
I could do it. I just may be on there with a glass of champagne.
Oh, well, you've done that before. We've had you on location before, so we might do exactly that. But anyway, look forward to that, and look forward to bringing you guys continued shows here as well. So thanks you very much for joining us today. Be sure and like and subscribe if you haven't on the way out. Also to remember that we are on podcasts. I know everybody doesn't get to watch a video all the time, but you don't want to miss us. We're on the podcast there, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast Addict. Type in Daniel Davis Deep Dive. You'll find us waiting there for you. And we'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.